The Scarab is an 8-wheeled vehicle, 2 pairs at the front, 2 in the middle, and 2 at the back, with additional axle-mounted thrusters providing pitch and roll attitude correction, supplemented by 2 powerful boost thrusters mounted on arms which deploy with the turret when sufficiently far from a landed ship. On the ground, you have a basic steering mechanism that turns the front and rear wheels, the latter in opposition to the front for a tighter turn radius at low speed. A throttle that controls forward and reverse speed through an all-wheel drive system, and a handbrake. The throttle can operate in 2 modes. With drive assist turned on, it's much like a traditional cruise control computer with the input setting the desired speed. With drive assist turned off, it provides direct input to wheel speed. The latter provides a slightly higher top speed and is probably better suited to analog steering inputs, while the former may help inexperienced drivers maintain control of their vehicle, especially when using digital steering inputs. Lastly, there are the power distributor pips. Since the SRV's shields provide zero resistance to terrain impacts, outside of combat situations it's usually advisable to keep 4 pips to engines. Some aficionados, like the Rock Rats, even advise turning the shield and all unnecessary modules off altogether when driving long distances, in order to save fuel and extend driving time. Along flat ground, there isn't much to say about driving the SRV. With 4 pips in engine, the top speed is just over 30 meters per second with drive assist on, and just under 40 meters per second with it turned off. That's equivalent to around 144 kilometers per hour. Now, the faster you go, the more prone the Scarab is to spin out. This is partly due to the exaggerated effects of rear-wheel steering at speed, but mostly because icy or low-gravity surface conditions will amplify the effect of any small errors made while driving. It's possible to apply opposite steering to counteract the skid, but more often than not this will result in fishtailing unless done with care. Getting off the ground. Things start to get interesting when you get the SRV off the ground, either with a low G bounce or by using the thrusters. Once in the air, the roll and pitch controls come into play. The first thing to note is that the Scarab behaves more like a ship flying with flight assist off. In other words, any pitch or roll motion that you initiate must be countered in the opposite direction. The second thing is that you can use the thrusters to gain altitude, to feather your landings, and, most interesting of all, to propel the SRV forwards. Picture the SRV a bit like a helicopter with the thrusters exerting a downward force. Tilt the SRV's nose down while you're in the air, and that force will start to propel you forwards. This is called tilt boosting. When done right, and over distance, this can get the SRV up to speeds well in excess of 100 meters per second. It's traveling like this, sometimes called fliving, where the SRV really starts to shine. Keep the throttle wide open, boost to get off the ground, tilt forwards, and boost again to start building up speed, making sure to keep some engine pips in reserve. Choose your next landing spot carefully. The leading edges of rounded mounds or the far side of small craters act as perfect kickers. Hit the ground level and square, never back wheels first, and bounce straight back up into another tilt boost. Don't be afraid to bounce hard. The SRV is a tough piece of machinery which can take a surprising amount of punishment, and your goal now is to spend as little time on the ground as possible, because, at speed, prolonged contact with the ground will almost invariably result in a spin-out. You can perform this action in a variety of different ways. For example, pitch down, roll right, pitch up, and roll left. And with practice, can use it to twist the SRV back through any angle in order to correct particularly bad bounces, or simply to show off by landing backwards. More subtly, you should be using this technique all the time to make micro adjustments to your attitude in order to hit each bounce as square as possible to the direction of travel. Yaw, or rather the lack of it, will now be your single biggest challenge. As you bound across the landscape, you'll inevitably get twisted sideways, and you need to correct that before the next bounce. To do this, you have to perform a rolling motion in the air, which is key to mastering the SRV. To illustrate this, hold your hand out flat in front of you. Now, roll your hand slightly to the right, then pitch it up a bit at the wrist, then roll it left again, and lastly, pitch back down. Voila! You have successfully yawed to the right. While we're in the air, there are two other things to note. Firstly, if you're trying to stick to a particular heading or follow a course, for racing or planetary circumnavigation perhaps, then you'll need to steer. Wheel steering is next to useless since you're on the ground so little, so steer in the air by banking right over onto your side and then using boost to gradually push yourself across to a new heading. Secondly, there's the matter of repair synthesis. You can perform repair synthesis at any time to repair the hull of the SRV back to 100%, and you should probably do this whenever the hull integrity drops much below 50%. Before you even set off, make sure you have sufficient supplies of the iron and nickel required by the basic blueprint, and pre-select synthesis in the right-hand panel so that it's right there when you need it. Hill climbing. The Scarab SRV is an incredibly versatile vehicle that is capable of driving up extremely steep slopes. However, there comes a point, somewhere around the 60-65 degrees incline, where it simply runs out of traction and or torque and will stop, or worse, start to slide back down. Now, there are some techniques that can be used to counter this. The minute you start to slip, use the handbrake and come to a complete stop before deciding what to do next. If you continue to slide even when the brake is on, then use steering to try and turn side on to the slope. The first technique you can employ when climbing a steep slope is to traverse across it rather than driving straight up, doubling back on yourself each time you reach the edge of the slope you're on. Picture the way a mountain road zigzags its way to the top. The other technique you can use is an extreme version of tilt boosting, best employed when you already have some forward momentum. Basically, get some air, then tilt the SRV nearly perpendicular to the ground and use all your boost to push yourself further up the slope, tilting back level just before contacting the slope again in order to land flat and then bounce and tilt back into the next uphill boost. Remember, the steeper the slope, the closer up will be to traveling straight along the ground, and the stronger your boost will have to be to counteract the gravity that will be trying to drag you back down the slope as soon as you leave the ground. Getting out of tight spots. Sometimes you could find yourself stuck in seemingly inaccessible areas of very rugged terrain. Don't give up just yet. There are still several things to try. The tilt boosting technique can also be performed sideways, and it's often possible to bunny hop across from one bit of slope to another in order to get out of pits and crevices. The other thing you can do is try recalling your ship. When you're on flatter ground, the ship will look for a nearby, or not so nearby, place to land. But in rough terrain, it will often come down right on top of your current location and then hover. If you're very lucky, you may be able to get yourself under it and board the hovering ship from there. The ship has a weak mag lift that can pull the SRV up into the bay from a short distance. However, if it doesn't, then try to get the SRV up onto the back of your ship. Dismissing the ship will cause it to give you a huge push upwards before the SRV slips off, and you can often use this to fly the SRV to a better location, repeating the process as necessary to finally escape. Putting your skills to the test. Once you start to master these techniques, you will open up a whole new world of exciting things to try in the SRV. Here are a few suggestions. SRV racing. Long-distance SRV races are a terrific way to test your skills and pit them against other drivers. Various groups such as the Buckyball Racing Club, the Hutton Truckers, and the Elite Racers run these from time to time, so keep an eye out on the usual sources of community information. Base jumping. Find a mountain with a plateau flat enough to land on. Fling your SRV off the top and ride the slopes back down to the bottom. One excellent place to try this is on the mountain next to Smith Base in the Beta Sculptoris system. But there are many other suggestions in the Guide to Good Base Jumping Locations, which can be found on the Pilots Federation forum. Ridge running. Specific to worlds such as Pumage 2C and Sinuefe VM-D C15-10-2A, whose surfaces are crisscrossed by long steep-sided ridges. Ridge running involves driving along these narrow ridges at speed, using all of the above skills to follow the path as far and as fast as you can without falling off. The Buckyball Racing Club has a standing time trial challenge called the Pomich Ridge Challenge for those interested in doing this competitively. Planetary circumnavigation. Perhaps the ultimate challenge for the SRV aficionado. Planetary circumnavigation involves driving all the way around the entire circumference of a planet or moon. See the Conquerors of Worlds article in issue 9 of this publication for more details. Tips and tricks. Although the boost thrusters normally fire down past the wheels, this is actually reversed when you're upside down, which means that applying boost will nearly always push you away from the ground. If you tumble when you're approaching your ship and end up on your back with no thrusters, because they've automatically retracted, simply dismiss your ship to reactivate them. If you can keep the tilt boosting technique going smoothly over many kilometers, it's possible, on a low-G world, to eventually bounce so fast and high that you can launch the SRV into orbit. There's a truism that applies to any form of driving, but which is especially pertinent to avoiding rocks in the path of the SRV. Focus on where you want the vehicle to go, and not on where you don't want it to go. When out material gathering, you may find it easier on high-G worlds. After destroying a rock, the materials will fall into a neat pile so that you can simply park on top of them all and then select each one in turn from the contacts panel in order to scoop them up.